I've read fire for 19 years. Cause and origin, mostly. I stand in the black after a burn goes out, and I let the char tell me where it started, and which way it ran. Fire is the most honest thing I've ever worked with. It doesn't lie. It can't. It only does what physics tells it to do, and physics doesn't have a reason to deceive anybody. The Little Slough fire lied to me. It burned 410 acres in the Payette backcountry east of Warm Lake, Idaho, in the last week of September. We caught it. We lined it. We called it contained on a Thursday. By Saturday, it was cold enough to walk. I mapped the perimeter myself, GPS on my hip, boots in the ash. I know where that fire stopped. And Sunday morning, it had moved 80 feet north. The whole burn scar, not spread, moved. Ground that was green on Saturday was grey on Sunday, and ground that was black on Saturday had grass coming up through it like nothing had ever happened there. Fire doesn't do that. Fire that's out stays out. There was no smoke, no heat, no wind that night, and nothing left to burn where it went. So I went back, and that's where it started to come apart. My name is Dale Kettering. I'm a fire investigator with the Forest Service, Region 4 out of Boise. And if you'd asked me in August whether I believed in anything I couldn't measure, I'd have laughed at you and gone back to my coffee. Little Slough came in as a lightning start. Dry thunderstorm rolled over the Salmon River Mountains on the 23rd, dropped a few thousand strikes and about 4 drops of rain, and by afternoon we had 3 new fires on the district. 2 were nothing. The third was Little Slough, tucked into a drainage between 2 ridges, chewing through lodgepole and beetle kill. I wasn't there for the fire. I came after, when the incident commander released it, and it was time to figure out cause and origin for the record. Standard work. I brought 2 people. Renata Cho ran drones for the district, a former hotshot who'd blown out a knee on the Ferguson fire in California and traded the SAW for a controller. She flew a matrice with a thermal payload, and she flew it like she was inside it. She kept a laminated photo of her old crew clipped to her flight case, and she'd tap it before every launch. Not superstitious, she said, just polite. Renata talked constantly when she was nervous, and went dead silent when she was scared, and I learned to read her by which one she was doing. The other was Thomas Farrell, our GIS tech, on loan from the supervisor's office. Thomas was 40, and dressed like a substitute teacher, and could pull satellite passes and historical fire perimeters out of a database, faster than I could ask for them. He had a daughter starting at Boise State, and he FaceTimed her every night at 7, whether or not we had signal, which mostly we didn't, so half his calls were him talking to a frozen frame of her face. He didn't seem to mind. Practice for when she stops answering, he said once, dry as chalk. The 3 of us drove up on the Saturday. 2 hours of pavement, 40 minutes of Forest Service road that tried to shake the fillings out of my truck, then a mile in on foot with packs. The burn was textbook. That's the part I need you to understand before any of the rest lands. When I walked it that first day, everything was where it should have been. I found the origin fast. A lightning-struck lodgepole snag near the bottom of the drainage. Cambium blown out in a spiral the way lightning does it. The classic V pattern of char widening uphill and downwind, exactly the way fire wants to run. Char depth deepest at the base of the snag. Grass and light fuels consumed cleanest, near the point of origin. I've seen it 1,000 times. I read it out loud for Renata's helmet cam so we'd have the audio. Point of origin here. Lightning ignition, single tree. Fire advanced north-northeast up the drainage. Wind-driven, standard slope run. Perimeters holding. This is going in the file as a natural start. No human factor. Easy day. Renata flew the whole scar for the map. Tomas set up his laptop on the tailgate and started stitching the drone imagery to the incident perimeter the crews had logged. I walked the edge on foot with the GPS, dropping points every 100 feet, the way I've done 1,000 times. Where the black meets the green, you drop a point. Simple. I logged 206 perimeter points that Saturday. I remember the number because Tomas made a joke about 206 being the area code for Seattle, and how the fire was clearly trying to relocate somewhere with better weather. Nobody laughed. It was that kind of joke you make so the day feels normal. We camped at the trailhead. Tomas FaceTimed his frozen daughter. Renata cleaned her drone props by headlamp. I fell asleep to the sound of a creak, and no wind at all, which is worth remembering. No wind. Sunday I went back to spot check the northern edge, because one of my points hadn't logged clean, and I like my maps tight. The edge wasn't where I left it. I want to be precise about how a thing like that reveals itself, because it's not a movie. There's no crash of music. There's a man standing in the woods holding a GPS unit, frowning at it, assuming he made a mistake. My point 188 was logged at the base of a fire-killed lodgepole, a big one, maybe 18 inches at the base, standing dead and black. I'd tied flagging to it, orange ribbon, so I could find the spot again. That's habit. You flag your controls. I found the flagging, orange ribbon, my handwriting on it, 188 DK/DK/9-27. It was tied to a green tree, a living lodgepole, needles on it, no char anywhere. And the black tree, the one I'd tied it to, was 80 feet north of me, standing in fresh black ground that had been living grass the day before. I stood there long enough that my GPS went to sleep. My first thought was the sane one. I tied it to the wrong tree. I was tired. It was late in the day. Easy mistake. Except my handwriting was on the ribbon, and my handwriting doesn't lie either, and the coordinates the unit had logged for 188 put me exactly where I was standing, at the green tree, in ground that showed no sign it had ever seen fire. I walked the 80 feet north to the black tree. The ground under it crunched, fresh char, still faintly warm to the back of my hand, though there'd been no heat in this fire for 2 days. The grass at the edge of the new black was singed at the tips and green at the roots. That is not how grass burns. Grass burns from the top of the fuel bed down. This looked like the fire had arrived at these blades from the side, brushed them, and kept going. Kept going where? North, toward ground that hadn't burned. I got on the radio to Renata at camp and told her to bring the drone up and fly the northern edge again, and to bring Tomas and yesterday's map. You find your point? She asked. I found a problem, just come up. Renata flew it. Tomas laid the new perimeter over Saturday's perimeter on his screen, and the two shapes did not match. They were the same fire, same total shape, same fingers of black reaching into the same drawers, but the whole thing was shifted. North and slightly east, like someone had taken a paper cutout of the burn scar and slid it across the landscape overnight. 81 feet, Tomas said. He measured it 3 times. The whole perimeter. Centroids moved 81 feet, 340 degrees, and the area is almost identical. 409 acres yesterday, 411 today. Fire spreads outward, I said. It doesn't slide. I know how fire works, Dale. Then tell me how it slid. He didn't. Renata had gone quiet, which told me exactly how she felt about it. Here's what a slide means, physically, and why it's impossible. For the scar to move north, 2 things have to happen at once. New ground on the north edge has to burn, which requires ignition, fuel, and heat that we didn't have. And old ground on the south edge has to unburn, grass regrowing, char vanishing, a green living tree standing where a black dead one had been. That second one isn't difficult. It's not even in the same category as difficult. Char doesn't reverse. Ash doesn't reassemble into grass. There is no natural process on Earth that regrows a fire-killed forest overnight into unburned green. So one of 2 things was true. Either my Saturday map was wrong, all 206 points, plus the crew's perimeter, plus Renata's drone flight, all wrong in the same direction by the same distance, or the ground had changed. I don't believe in the second one. I want that on the record. I spent the next 3 weeks trying to prove the first one. We stayed. I called the district and said the origin work was taking longer than expected, which was true, and I did not say why, which was cowardice, and I knew it even then. Tomas pulled the crew's original perimeter, the one the hotshots had GPS during containment, before any of us arrived. It matched my Saturday map to within the normal slop of 2 different people walking 2 different lines. Saturday's perimeter was real. multiple independent sources. The fire, when it went out, was where I said it was, which meant Sunday's fire was somewhere it had no right to be. Renata flew a thermal pass over the whole scar Sunday night, looking for any heat source that could explain a new run. Thermal shows you what the eye can't. A stump hole smoldering underground, a root fire creeping, anything above ambient. The scar was cold, uniformly cold. No hot spots, no smolder, nothing above the temperature of the surrounding forest. Whatever had blackened that new ground on the north edge had done it without heat, or had done it and cooled to ambient in a way fire simply does not do. Not that fast, not that clean. There's a stump hole reading here, Renata said, pointing at one orange pixel on the thermal feed. Southeast corner. Thomas cross-referenced it. That's not in the burn. That's 200 feet outside the perimeter, in the green. So it's a warm rock or something. At night, warmer than everything around it? He zoomed. The heat signature was small, contained, tree-shaped. It's a tree, a warm tree, in the unburned forest. I made a note to check it in daylight, and I did not sleep well. Monday morning the scar had moved again, 62 feet this time, same bearing, 340 degrees. And that warm tree Renata had flagged in the green. The new perimeter had reached it. It was inside the black now, fire killed, standing dead, char to the crown. Tomas found the photo he'd taken of it Sunday afternoon on his phone, when we were speculating about warm rocks. In the Sunday photo it was green, full canopy, healthy, needles, same tree, same GPS coordinate. Sunday, alive. Monday, burned to death, and nothing between the two. No heat the night in between, no wind, no ignition, no smoke, no sound. Renata had the drone up half that night on a battery rotation just watching, and she saw nothing move, nothing glow, nothing burn. She watched a forest stay perfectly still in the dark, and in the morning part of it was dead. It's walking, Renata said. She said it flat, the way you say a fact you've given up arguing with. The fire's walking north, 60, 80 feet a night. Fire doesn't walk. I know that, Dale. Her voice cracked on the second word. I know it doesn't. I flew over it all night. It didn't walk, and it's north. Both of those things were true. She hadn't seen it move. It had moved. I've thought about that sentence more than any other from that whole month, because it's the shape of the entire case. Nobody ever saw it happen. It only ever had happened. We needed data that wasn't ours. When your own instruments tell you something impossible, the first move isn't to believe them. It's to find another set of eyes that never touched your equipment or your assumptions. Thomas pulled satellite. There are a handful of birds that catch fire in the western US. The polar orbiting ones with thermal bands that feed the automated fire detection systems, plus the higher resolution commercial constellations that image most of the country every day or two. Thomas requested everything over the Little Slough footprint for the previous 10 days. The thermal detections told the boring correct story. Heat blooming during the active fire, cooling to nothing by containment. After Thursday, no heat. The satellites agreed with our thermal camera. Nothing was burning out there. The optical imagery, the daytime photographs from orbit, told a different story, and it was the first time I felt the floor of the world tilt under me. The burn scar in the satellite photos was moving north, day by day. You could flip through the images like a stack of cards and watch the grey shape crawl up the drainage against a green background, 60, 80 feet a pass, same as our maps. The satellites saw it too, which should have been a relief, independent confirmation, at last, that it wasn't our equipment. Except the satellites can't see heat that isn't there. There was no heat in those thermal bands. The optical images showed a burn scar advancing across the landscape with no thermal signature driving it. A shadow of a fire, moving, with no fire underneath. That's not possible, Tomas said. The optical and thermal are the same satellite, same pass. It's saying the ground looks burned and the ground is cold, at the same time, in the same pixel. Ground can look burned and be cold, I said, after the fact. Not while the burned part is still moving, Dale. He was right. A cold burn scar is a normal thing. It's what I stand in every week of fire season. A cold burn scar that relocates itself 80 feet north every night, visible from orbit, with no heat source, is not a normal thing. It's not any kind of thing I have a word for. Thomas went back further into the archive. He wanted a baseline, a clean image of the drainage from before the fire ever started, so he could measure the movement against untouched ground. He pulled a commercial pass from July, 2 months before the lightning strike. High resolution, cloud-free, beautiful clean image of the Little Slough drainage in full summer green. There was a burn scar in it, small, maybe 40 acres, down at the bottom of the drainage, right around the origin snag, 2 months before the fire that made it. Bad date stamp, I said. Metadata's corrupted. Thomas checked the metadata 3 ways. The acquisition date was July 14th, verified against the satellite's own orbital log. The image was real, it was that drainage, and it showed a burn that would not exist for another 10 weeks. He sat back from the laptop and took his glasses off and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. And he didn't say anything for a while, and then he said the thing that I think about at 3 in the morning. Dale, what if it's not moving forward? What do you mean? What if we're seeing it in the wrong order? What if the fire didn't start in September? He put his glasses back on. What if it's been burning this drainage for a long time, and September is just where we walked in on it? I want to tell you I dismiss that. I'm an evidence man. Evidence has an order. Cause before effect. Ignition before spread. Char before ash. That order is the only thing that lets me do my job. Take it away and I'm not an investigator. I'm just a man standing in the woods watching things I can't explain. But I couldn't dismiss it, because the July image was sitting right there on the screen, and July comes before September, and there was a burn in July. I did what I do when the data scares me. I went and touched the ground. I hiked down to the origin snag, the lightning tree, the point where I'd started the whole investigation, the one honest thing in the case. Single lodgepole, blown-out cambium, classic strike spiral. Cause and origin. Ground zero. I cut a cross-section. When a tree burns and survives, or burns and dies, it keeps a record. Fire scars in the growth rings. A black triangle of char, healed over by later growth, dated by counting the rings back from the bark. Trees are honest the way fire is honest. They just sit there recording the truth, ring by ring, year by year. A fire scar in a tree is a receipt with a date on it. I took my cross-section back to camp and counted the rings under a hand lens by lantern light, while Thomas held the light steady. The tree had burned before. There was an old fire scar, healed over, deep in the wood. I counted the rings from the scar out to the bark to date it. 14 years. The origin tree of the Little Slough fire had a healed fire scar in it from 14 years ago. There had been a fire in this exact spot 14 years before the lightning ever struck. Thomas stopped holding the light. Dale, 14 years ago. I know. I know what it is. My voice didn't sound like mine. That's the Slough Creek fire, 2011. I knew that fire. Everybody in Region 4 my age knows that fire. It was the fire where we lost Aaron Pruitt. I need to tell you about Aaron, and then I'll stop the way you're supposed to stop these things, and let you decide if you want the rest. Aaron Pruitt was my partner for the first 6 years I did this work. He taught me cause and origin, taught me to read char depth, to find the origin in the mess, to let the fire tell me what it did, instead of deciding first and finding evidence second. The fire already knows what happened, he used to say. You're just the last one to find out. He was easy to be around in a job that isn't easy. He kept a running list of the worst things people had done to start fires. The guy who tried to smoke a groundhog out of its hole. The couple whose gender reveal went to 300 acres. And he'd recite it at the worst moments to keep a crew from breaking. He had a wife named Colleen and a kid on the way that summer. He was 38. In September 2011, there was a fire in the Slough Creek drainage. Aaron went in with a crew to scout a spot fire that had jumped the line. The fire did something nobody predicted. A wind event, a blow-up, a chimney of flame running up a drainage that the model said was safe. 4 people got out. Aaron didn't. They recovered him 2 days later. I wasn't on that fire. I was supposed to be. I'd swapped assignments with him 3 weeks earlier so I could be home for my father's surgery. That's not a thing I've told many people. I've spent 14 years being the man who took the fire that wasn't his and gave Aaron the one that was. The Slough Creek fire of 2011 burned the same drainage I was standing in. They renamed it after that, cleaned it up, let it grow back, and in 2025, when lightning hit the same ground, the incident got a new name off the nearest map feature, Little Slough. Nobody on my crew connected it. 14 years is a long time. The forest had come all the way back. You'd never know anything had happened there, except the trees knew. The trees had it written down, ring by ring, and the burn scar that was walking north across that drainage in September of 2025, 60, 80 feet a night, silent, cold, moving toward the ridge, was walking the exact path the 2011 fire had taken. I didn't know that yet, standing at the lantern with the cross-section in my hands. I only knew the date and the name, and that my chest had gone tight. Tomas was saying something and I couldn't hear it over the sound of the creek that had no wind behind it. I put the wood down. I said, "We're mapping the old fire tomorrow, the 2011 perimeter. I want it overlaid on the walking scar. Dale, just pull the 2011 perimeter, Tomas." He looked at me for a long moment, the lantern between us. "There's a problem with that," he said. "I already pulled it. Tonight, while you were counting rings. The 2011 perimeter's in the archive." "Good. Overlay it. That's the problem." He turned the laptop toward me. "It won't hold still either. The archived perimeter, the one from 14 years ago." He tapped the screen, where a red outline sat over the drainage. "I saved a screenshot an hour ago. Then I refreshed the database just now to be sure I had the current record." He set the two images side by side. The archived 2011 fire perimeter, 1 hour apart. It had moved. North, 340 degrees. The record of a fire that ended 14 years ago had changed while we sat there. You don't refresh a 14-year-old fire perimeter and watch it move. The archive is a flat file. It's a shape somebody drew in 2011 and saved, and it has no more reason to change than a photograph in a shoebox. I made Tomas show me his hands weren't on the trackpad. I made him pull the file a third time on a fresh connection. Same result. The red outline of the 2011 fire had crept 80 feet north between one screenshot and the next, matching, to the foot, the distance the living scar outside our tent had walked that same night. 2 fires, 14 years apart, moving in step. One of them dead and archived, one of them cold and impossible, both of them heading up the same drainage toward the same ridge, at the same pace, on the same bearing. "Databases don't do that," Tomas said. He'd said it 4 times. It had stopped being an argument and become a thing he needed to hear out loud. "Get me the raw file. Not the map layer. The actual coordinate list, the numbers. Numbers I could check. Numbers don't render themselves on a screen. They either say what they said before, or they don't. And screenshot it every time. Time-stamped. We build a log." He built the log. Over the next hour, the coordinate list changed twice more. Small increments, always north. Tomas started reading the deltas off in a voice that got quieter each time, and around 1 in the morning he stopped reading them at all, and just watched. And I let him, because I didn't have anything to tell him that would help. I want you to understand what that hour was like, because the horror of this case was never a thing that jumped out at you. It was a man and a woman and I, sitting in a nylon tent at the bottom of a dark drainage, watching a spreadsheet, and being more afraid than I have ever been at any actual fire in my life. The creek ran outside. Renata was asleep, or pretending to be, and a column of numbers on a laptop screen was quietly rewriting the past while we watched, and there was not one single thing any of us could do about it. The wildlife left that night. I didn't clock it until morning. There's a sound to a live forest that you stop hearing because it never stops. Nuthatches. A Clark's nutcracker being obnoxious. Red squirrels running their little inventories. The general electric hum of a place that's alive. I'd been sleeping to it for 3 nights. I woke Tuesday to nothing. Not quiet, nothing. The creek was still running, so it wasn't my ears. But there was no bird, no squirrel. I lay in the bag listening for a solid 2 minutes, trying to catch one animal sound, and I couldn't. It was the kind of silence you only get in deep winter, and it was late September with the sun coming up warm. I got out and walked a loop around camp. No tracks in the ash from the night, and there should have been. Deer cross a burn scar at night. You find their prints in soft char every morning. Nothing. I found one thing, a Stella's jay, dead, at the edge of the black. No mark on it. Not burned, not struck, not sick-looking. Just down in the ash, with its wings folded, like it had sat down to rest and forgotten how to leave. Renata came out and found me crouched over it. She's picked up more dead things off more fires than I have. She looked at it for a while. No smoke inhalation, she said. Nothing to inhale. Wings aren't singed. She turned it over with a stick. It just quit. Birds don't just quit. Yeah. She stood up. Neither does fire, Dale. We've been out here 3 days learning what doesn't happen. She was trying to make it a joke. It didn't take. We stood over the dead jay in a forest that had gone silent overnight, and neither of us said the thing we were both thinking, which was that the animals had known something the night before, that we were only figuring out now. The scar had moved again in the night. I didn't even need to check the GPS. I could see it. The black had crossed a small game trail that had been in the green Monday, and now the trail ran straight into the char and stopped, like a road into a lake. But the movement wasn't the thing that morning. The thing that morning was the smell. Fresh burn has a smell everybody knows. Wet char, creosote, the sweet edge of scorched pitch. A cold burn scar 3 days out smells faint and mineral, like a dead campfire in the rain. That's what it should have smelled like. That's what it had smelled like Saturday and Sunday. Tuesday, it smelled like a fire that was actively burning. Greenwood smoke, resin, the specific throat catch of live combustion, strong enough that Renata coughed, and there was no smoke, not a wisp. No heat on the thermal. We'd confirmed that twice. The air smelled like a running crown fire, and looked like a cold grey scar, and felt, to the back of your hand held over it, like nothing at all. Smell is the one sense you can't argue with a machine about. My thermal camera can't lie to my nose. Something in that scar was doing every single thing a fire does. Killing trees, blackening ground, producing the exact chemistry of smoke that my body has been trained by 19 years to recognize, while producing zero of the one thing that defines a fire, which is heat. I collected soil. That's a real step, and it mattered. When ground burns, the fire drives a chemical signature down into it. You get a layer of ash and char over reddened, heat-altered soil. And if it's hot enough, you get a hydrophobic layer a couple inches down, where the burned organics coat the mineral grains and water beads on top, instead of soaking in. It's measurable. It's datable, roughly. It's the fire's fingerprint pressed into the dirt, and it stays for years. I dug a soil pit in the new black, ground that had been living grass 36 hours before. I expected fresh char over unaltered soil, because 36 hours isn't enough to cook the mineral layer. I got a hydrophobic layer 2 inches down, fully formed, the kind you get from a hot, slow burn that sits on the ground for hours. I poured water from my bottle onto the mineral soil, and it beaded and ran off like the dirt was wax paper. That takes sustained heat, real hours. In ground that had been green the morning before yesterday, in a scar my thermal camera swore was stone cold. I dug a second pit outside the perimeter, in the green ahead of the scar's path, to the north, where the fire hadn't reached yet. The hydrophobic layer was there too, in unburned ground. Faint but there, water beading 2 inches down under living grass, under a canopy with green needles on it, in soil that by every visible measure had never seen a fire. The ground was cooked ahead of the burn. The scar was walking towards soil that was already, quietly, waiting for it. I called Boise that afternoon. I want it on the record that I tried to bring this into the daylight, to people with more letters after their names than I have. I got the district FMO, and I laid it out flat and professional. Perimeter migration. No thermal signature. soil anomalies, satellite discrepancies. I left out the archive changing and the birds. I'm not a fool. I asked for a burn behavior analyst, and, if I could get one, somebody from the research station who could look at the soil. There was a pause on the line, and then he said, "Dale, say that first part again. The perimeter's doing what?" "Migrating north, 60 to 80 feet a night. Whole scar." Another pause. Then, "Careful. The way you talk to someone you're worried about. How long you been out there? You sleeping okay?" I understood him. I'd have said the same thing to me. There is no report form for this. There is no code in the incident system for a fire that walks. If I filed what I actually had, the kindest outcome was a wellness check and a desk. So I did the thing you do. I said the drone was picking up perimeter refinements that didn't reconcile with the ground survey. Would he authorize a few more days and a specialist? He authorized the days. He did not have a specialist. He told me to get some rest. He was being decent. That was the worst part. I hung up, and Renata was watching me. "They're not sending anybody," she said. It wasn't a question. There's nobody to send. There's no expert in this. This isn't a thing. It's a thing, Dale. I'm standing in it. Renata flew a mission that afternoon that I've watched maybe 40 times since, frame by frame, and I still can't tell you what I'm looking at. She wanted to catch it moving. Simple idea. If the scar advances at night, put the drone over the leading edge at dusk and record continuously on thermal and optical until the battery dies. Swap batteries. Keep the northern edge under constant observation. She rigged 3 batteries and a schedule. We would watch the exact line where black met green all night and see fire do the thing fire cannot do. The gap between batteries was 90 seconds. Land, swap, relaunch. Renata did it in the dark by feel, the way she used to sharpen a saw. 90 seconds of no footage, 3 times, spread across 7 hours of recording. We reviewed it Wednesday morning. All 3 of us crowded around her tablet. The leading edge did not move on camera, not once. In 7 hours of thermal and optical footage, that line between the black and the green held perfectly still. No creep, no glow, no heat, no smoke, nothing. A dead cold boundary, motionless, for 7 hours. Then, at the second battery swap, 2:47 to 2:48 a.m., 90 seconds of nothing, while Renata knelt in the dark, clicking a battery into place 40 feet away, the edge jumped. When the drone came back up, the black had advanced 66 feet north. In 90 seconds during which the only witness was a woman with her hands full and her eyes on a battery clip, and she heard nothing, and she saw nothing, and she was standing right there. I was 10 yards from it, Renata said. Her voice had that flat, silent, scared quality now, the bad one. I'd have felt 66 feet of forest burn. I'd have felt the heat. I'd have heard the trees. Dale, a fire that runs 60 feet screams. You can hear it a mile off. She pressed play again, watched the edge sit still, watched the gap, watched the edge jump. It waited. It waited until the camera was down. It waited until I wasn't looking. "It's not waiting," I said. "It's not doing anything. It doesn't have a..." I didn't finish. I'd been about to say it doesn't have a will, and I realized I had nothing left to base that on except habit. We ran the mission again the next night with 2 drones, staggered, so there was never a gap. Never a moment when the edge wasn't on camera. The scar didn't move that night. First night in 5 it held still, and in the morning, Renata found both of her spare batteries dead. Not drained, dead. The cells ruptured, the casings swollen the way a battery looks after a hard overheat. They'd been at ambient temperature in her flight case, 10 feet from where she slept. Something had cooked them in the night. There was no heat anywhere the thermal could find, and her batteries had died like they'd been thrown in a fire. We were down to 1 drone after that. Renata clipped the photo of her old crew back onto the case and didn't tap it, and that told me more than anything she said all week. Tomas was the one who found the pattern, because Tomas thinks in layers. He'd been quietly building a stack, every image he could pull of that drainage, every date, going back as far as the archives went. Optical satellite, aerial photography, old fire perimeters, a couple of historic photos he'd scanned from the district's paper files. He aligned them all to the same coordinate grid so he could flip through decades of that one piece of ground like a hand of cards. He called me over Thursday evening. He'd stopped making the area code jokes days ago. His daughter's frozen face was open in another window. He hadn't been able to get a call out in 2 days, and I think he just left it up for company. I mapped every burn this drainage has ever had, he said, from the record. Watch the origin points. He flipped through. 2011. The Slough Creek fire, the one that killed Aaron, started low in the drainage and ran north up to the ridge. Before that, an old fire in 1988 from the aerial photos started a little further up, ran north to the ridge. Before that, a fire scar visible in a 1961 survey photo, higher still, running north to the ridge, and a Forest Service sketch map from 1934, hand-drawn, of a fire that started near the top and burned north over the ridge and out. Every fire in the record starts higher up the drainage than the one before it, Thomas said, and they all run the same direction, north, toward the ridge. He flipped back and forth, slow, so I could see it. 1934 starts near the top, 1961 starts lower, 1988 lower than that, 2011 lower than that, 2025. He tapped the origin snag. The lightning tree, the bottom of the drainage, starts at the very bottom, the lowest yet, so the origins are marching down the drainage. Older fires higher, newer fires lower, down the drainage over 90 years, and each individual fire runs up the drainage, north, to the ridge. He sat back. Dale, it's the same shape, every time. It's the same fire, walking. The whole ground-level scar walks north over a few weeks. We're watching that part live. And the starting point walks south over decades. It's one motion. It's a fire that's crossing this drainage, back and forth, so slowly that a human life only catches one lap of it. I made myself say the flat objection, because somebody had to. 4 separate fires over 90 years in the same drainage isn't a mystery. Drainages reburn. Same fuel, same wind patterns, same lightning exposure. That's Fire Ecology 101. It is, Thomas agreed. Except, he pulled up the coordinate log, the one that had been quietly changing all week. The 2011 perimeter in the archive is still moving. Right now, tonight. It's up to 490 feet north of where it was Monday. The dead fire is keeping pace with the live one. And, he switched windows. I checked the 1988 perimeter this afternoon. Out of curiosity, it moved too, same bearing. And the 1961 fire scar in the survey photo, Thomas, is bigger than it was Tuesday, Dale. The scar in the 1961 photograph grew. A photo from before I was born changed this week. He took his glasses off. His hands weren't steady. They're all moving. Every fire this drainage ever had. All of them, together, north. Like they were never really separate. I went up to the ridge alone that evening. I shouldn't have gone alone. I told Renata I wanted to check the leading edge before dark, and she looked at me like she knew that wasn't the whole reason. And it wasn't. The ridge was where the walking scar was headed. Every fire in 90 years had run to that ridge and stopped, or gone over it. If the thing was walking north, the ridge was where it was walking to, and I wanted to see the ground it wanted before it got there. The climb is where the landscape started to feel wrong, in a way I couldn't put on a form. It's hard to describe without sounding like I'd lost the thread. The trees on the way up were spaced too evenly. Not planted even, but even in a way natural forest isn't, like something had been culling it. The deadfall all pointed the same direction, north, every log, as if a wind had laid them down that had only ever blown one way for 100 years. And the higher I got, the quieter it got, until I was above the creek and there was no sound at all. Not wind, not bird, not my own boots, which should have been crunching duff. I stopped and stomped just to hear it. The sound came a half-second late, like the forest had to think about whether to give it back. At the top of the ridge, the ground opened into a small saddle, and in the saddle there was old black. Old, Cold, healed burn. The top of the 1934 fire, I figured. The oldest one, grown over but still readable in the char on the standing snags. The place where the walking fire had been 90 years ago, when it was up here at the top before it started its long march down. And in the middle of the old saddle burn, there was a clearing where nothing grew. Not regrowth, not brush, not even the fireweed and lupin that colonize old burns first and fastest. Bare mineral soil, roughly the size of a small room, and the grass at its edge was green at the root and singed at the tip, the exact same wrong grass I'd found at the walking edge, 500 feet downhill and 5 days earlier. I knelt and put the back of my hand near the bare ground. Warm. The only warm ground I'd found in 6 days. Faint, blood warm, like something had been lying there and just left. I got out my GPS to mark it, and the unit couldn't hold a fix. It had held fine the whole trip up. In that clearing it spun, searching, losing satellites, throwing an error I'd never seen, position implausible. The coordinates it kept trying to show me put me not on the ridge, but 1,100 feet north and 400 feet lower, down in the drainage, in the green, ahead of the walking scar, where the fire was going, not where I was standing. I backed out of the clearing. The GPS locked immediately. I stepped back in, position implausible, down in the drainage. I did it 4 times because I'm an evidence man, and evidence needs to repeat. It repeated. In that one spot, my location was somewhere I wasn't, and the somewhere was exactly where all the moving scars were headed. The light was going. I did not want to be on that ridge in the dark, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I started down. Halfway down I smelled smoke again. Live smoke, running fire smoke. And I stopped and turned a full circle, and there was nothing. No glow, no haze. The drainage below me cold and grey, and still in the last light. But under the smoke smell there was another one now, and it took me a few seconds to place it because it didn't belong in a forest at all. Nomex. Scorched Nomex and sweat, the smell of fire crew, the specific stink of somebody who's been on the line for 16 hours in flame-resistant clothes. I've smelled it 1,000 times on 1,000 people. I was smelling it alone on a ridge with no crew within 40 miles. I told myself it was memory. Smell does that. I'd been thinking about Aaron for 5 days straight. The brain serves up what it's been chewing on. That's real, that's documented, that's the sane explanation, and I clung to it all the way down the mountain. But when I got back to camp, Renata was standing outside the tent very still, facing the dark drainage, and she didn't turn around when I came up, and I said her name twice before she answered. "There's somebody up on the edge," she said quietly. "Been there 20 minutes. Doesn't move." I glassed him. She handed me the binoculars without looking at me. Northern edge. Where the fire's going. Just standing in the black, facing away from us, looking uphill. "I think it's a person, Dale. It's the right shape for a person." I raised the binoculars. The northern edge was 600 yards off in the last grey light. There was a shape standing in the black, upright, still, facing away, uphill, north, the direction of travel. "I already tried the radio at him," Renata said. "There's nobody scheduled to be out here. There's no road to that edge. I've flown that ground for a week. Nobody could have walked in without me seeing." Her voice was doing the flat, silent, scared thing, all the way. "And Dale, I took a photo through the scope, 40 minutes ago, before you got back, right when I first saw him." She held up her phone. The photo showed the northern edge in slightly better light, the same shape, standing in the black. But in the photo, the black around the figure ran another 200 feet north of where it was now. The scar in the 40-minute-old photograph was ahead of the scar I was looking at through the binoculars. The fire in the picture had already gone somewhere. The fire in front of me hadn't reached yet, and the figure in the photo was closer to us than the one I was watching through the glass, as if, in the picture, it had been walking down toward camp. And in the last 40 minutes, it had walked back up, to wait for the fire to catch up to where it already was. Renata took the phone back and looked at the picture, and then out at the standing shape, and out at the drainage that had gone completely, perfectly silent around us, and she said, very softly. I don't want to do another night out here. I didn't either, but the shape was standing exactly where the GPS had said I was, up on the ridge an hour ago, 1,100 feet north, in the green, where the fire was going, where I apparently already was. We didn't go to the figure that night. I want to be honest about that. I told Renata we'd lose the light, that walking into a moving scar in the dark was how people got hurt, that we'd document it at dawn. All true, all professional, all a way of not saying that I was afraid to walk toward the shape standing where my GPS had put me an hour before. We took turns watching it. It didn't move the whole night, or it moved only when nobody was looking, which by then were the same thing. Around 3, I had the glasses, and I nodded off for what couldn't have been 90 seconds, and when I came back, the shape was gone, and the northern edge had jumped 140 feet toward camp, the most it had ever moved, and the smell of live smoke was so thick, I woke Thomas coughing. At first light, the black had crossed the creek. That was the thing that finally moved me, more than the figure. For 6 days, the fire had kept to one side of the drainage, and now the char ran through the water and up our bank and stopped 40 feet from the tents. And the creek itself, I checked it, I made myself check it, ran warm. Not hot, warm, blood warm, the temperature of the bare ground in the ridge clearing. The one cold-running thing in that whole valley had gone warm in the night, and there was still nothing on the thermal, nothing to see, nothing to explain it. It's coming to us, Renata said. She was already breaking down the drone. It spent a week walking north, and now it turned around, and it's coming down to us. Because we're between it and... She stopped. Between it and what? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Between it and south. Between it and the next lap. Between it and the bottom of the drainage, where the origins had been marching for 90 years, one fire at a time. Thomas hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the truck with the inverter running his laptop off the battery, and when he came down to camp at dawn he had a printout, which was a strange and formal thing to see in that place. Clean white paper in a valley that smelled like it was burning. I pulled the 2011 incident file, he said. The whole thing. The Slough Creek fire. I wanted the fatality investigation. He wouldn't look at me while he said it. The serious accident report. For Aaron Pruitt. Thomas, you need to see it, Dale. It's not what you think it is. I have never read that report. 19 years, and I never read it. And everyone I work with knows not to bring it up. And Thomas knew too, which is how I understood that whatever was on the paper had scared him enough to break that rule. He handed it to me. It was the map page, the one every fatality report has, showing the fire perimeter over time, the crew's positions, the entrapment site, the place where Aaron died, marked with a small triangle and a coordinate. I'd never seen the coordinate. I looked at it. Then I looked at the GPS on my hip, still logged with the point from the ridge clearing, the one it had insisted I was standing in when I was 1,100 feet away. Position implausible. Same coordinate. Aaron died in the ridge saddle, the bare clearing where nothing grew, the warm ground, the place my GPS kept trying to send me to. The top of the walking fire's path, the oldest black, the highest origin, was the spot where I'd lost him. There's more, Thomas said, very quietly. Read the narrative, the timeline of the entrapment. I read it, and I want to tell you what breaks a person about a document like that, because it isn't the horror, it's the ordinariness. It's the 24-hour clock and the flat agency prose. 1642. Spot fire observed north of Division Break. 1651. Crew of 5, directed to scout and assess. And there, in the list of the 5, a name I didn't expect, because I had spent 14 years telling myself I wasn't there. The report listed the crew boss who'd assigned the scout, the one who sent 5 people up the drainage toward a spot fire that turned into a chimney. Who made the call, on the radio, that the drainage was good, go check it, we've got time. The crew boss was me. I need to slow down here, because this is the part I got wrong for 14 years, and I don't fully understand how a person gets a thing like this wrong. except that I've come to believe the mind will burn any bridge it has to in order to build the story it can live inside. I did swap assignments with Aaron in September of 2011. That was real. My father's surgery was real. But the swap was 3 weeks after Slough Creek, not before. I wasn't home in the mountains missing the fire that killed my partner. I was on the fire. I was the crew boss. I read the drainage, and I read it wrong. And I put 5 people into it, and only 4 came back. And the one who didn't was the man who taught me to read fire in the first place. And sometime in the weeks after, I can't tell you when, there's no moment I can point to, I rebuilt it. I moved the swap earlier. I moved myself off the mountain. I made a version where I owed Aaron a debt of luck instead of a debt of judgment. Survivor's guilt is the clean name for it, the name the grief counselors used in the sessions I attended and don't remember agreeing to attend. But it wasn't Survivor's guilt. Survivors didn't send him up the drainage. I did. Tomas watched me read it. He's a decent man, and he didn't say anything, and he didn't touch me, just stood there in the smoke that had no fire while I found out, at 51 years old, standing in the reburn of the worst thing I ever did, that I had spent 14 years being the wrong man in my own story. You didn't know, he finally said. I made the call, Tomas. You read the drainage the way the model read it. Everybody read it that way. The report clears you. It says the fire behavior was outside all prediction. It says nobody could have. I know what the report says. I folded it in half, then in quarters, small, the way you fold something you can't stand to have open. The report's evidence. Evidence doesn't lie. I heard myself say it. The thing I'd built my whole life on. And I understood, finally, why this fire had come apart in front of me and no one else. Why the scar walked for me. Why the archive changed for me. Why the GPS kept trying to drag me up to that clearing. It wasn't the fire that had been lying for 14 years. It was me. The one piece of evidence I'd never been willing to read was the one with my name on it, and I'd been standing in the black my whole career, reading everyone else's fires, so I'd never have to read my own. I went up to the ridge that afternoon. Renata tried to stop me, and then she tried to come with me, and I told her no on both counts. Not to be noble, because the GPS had my coordinate up there, and whatever was standing in that clearing, I owed it a visit alone. 14 years overdue. The climb was worse than before. The false silence, the half-second delay on my own footsteps, the deadfall all pointing north. The smell of Nomex got stronger the higher I went, and the live smoke smell, and under both of them now a third smell that I knew and hated, the smell that a fatality site has, that I'd smelled exactly once in my life 2 days after Slough Creek, and had spent 14 years pretending I hadn't. The clearing was where it had been, bare mineral soil, room-sized, warm, but the grass at its edge wasn't singed hip and green root anymore. It was gone. Fresh black now. The walking edge had climbed all the way back up the drainage in a single night to reach this one spot, the very place it started 90 years ago. Closing a circle I still don't have the geometry to describe. There was a shape in the clearing. I'm not going to tell you it was Aaron, because I don't know what it was, and I've promised myself I'll never claim to know a thing I can't put on a form. It was upright, and it was the right size, and it was facing away from me, uphill, north, toward the top of the ridge, and the edge where every fire in that drainage had gone over and out. It didn't turn around. The whole time I was up there it never turned around, and I'm grateful for that, because I don't know what I'd have done with a face. I did the only thing I know how to do. I read the ground. I knelt at the edge of the bare clearing, and I looked at the char, and the char told me what char always tells me, honest as it's ever been. There was no origin here, no V pattern, no ignition point, no direction of travel. The black in the clearing didn't come from anywhere, and it didn't go anywhere. It was just there, the way grief is just there, the way a name on a report is just there whether you read it or not. It wasn't a fire. It had never been a fire. It was the shape a fire leaves, walking, looking for the place it happened, and never quite arriving, because the man who could tell it where wouldn't say. So I said it, out loud, to a shape that didn't turn around, in a clearing, where my own equipment swore I was already standing. I said his name. I said I made the call. I said I read the drainage, and I read it wrong, and I sent him up it, and that there was no swap, no debt of luck, no version where I was home in the mountains, that I had built that man out of nothing, because I couldn't stand next to the true one. I said I was sorry, which is a word too small for it, and the only word there is. I said he taught me that the fire already knows what happened, and you're just the last one to find out, and that he was right, and that I'd been the last one to find out for 14 years. The shape didn't turn around, but the smell went. All of it, at once, the Nomex, the smoke, the fatality site smell, gone between one breath and the next, and the ordinary smell of a September forest came back, duff and pitch and cold water, and somewhere below me in the drainage, a Clark's nutcracker started up, loud and stupid and alive, the first bird I'd heard in 3 days. When I looked back at the clearing, the shape wasn't there, and the ground had gone cold. I put the back of my hand to the bare soil where it had been warm for a week, and it was cold as the rest of the mountain, and my GPS, when I checked it, held a fix on the first try, and put me exactly where I was standing, on the ridge, position plausible. We packed out the next morning. The fire had stopped walking. I don't have a better word for it than stopped. The scar was where it was, and it stayed there, cold, ordinary, a 400-acre burn that read like 1,000 others. Lightning start at the bottom of the drainage, wind-driven run to the north, standard slope behavior, no human factor. The report wrote itself. I filed it clean. The archive stopped changing. Thomas checked the 2011 perimeter every hour for 2 days, and it held. The 1988 and 1961 fires held. He never told anyone at the SO what the coordinate list had done for a week, and neither did I, and I don't know that either of us could have proved it happened, which is its own kind of horror I've made my peace with. Renata flew one last mapping pass, clipped her crew photo back on the case, and tapped it, and that told me she was going to be all right, or as all right as any of us gets. I retired that winter, not because of little slough, or not only. 19 years is enough, and I found I couldn't stand in the black anymore without wondering whose fire I was really reading. Here is where I'm supposed to tell you it's over, and it mostly is. I go up to the district office sometimes, the way retired people do, and drink their bad coffee. Aaron's widow, Colleen, remarried a good man in Missoula. Their kid, the one who was on the way that summer, is a wildland firefighter now, 3rd season, and doesn't know I had anything to do with any of it, and I've decided that's a mercy I get to keep. The human part of it is resolved the way human things resolve, which is to say incompletely, and quietly, and mostly in the dark where no one can see you do it. But I'll leave you with the one thing I can't file, because Thomas found it 3 weeks ago and sent it to me, and I've looked at it every day since. He was pulling routine imagery for a different fire, a real one, a new start 2 drainages over, and out of habit, the habit that ruined and saved him both, he pulled a fresh optical pass over Little Slove, just to look, just to be sure. There's a burn scar in it, cold, no thermal signature, ordinary in every way. It's not where we left it, it's moved, south this time, down out of our drainage, over the low divide, into the next valley, 60, 80 feet a pass, on a new bearing, toward new ground and a new ridge, and, I have to assume, a new man somewhere down the line, who read something wrong once, and won't let himself remember it. Thomas measured the centroid 3 times, the way he does. Then he called me, and neither of us said anything for a while, and then he asked me the only question either of us has left, the one I've stopped trying to answer. Dale, he said, whose is it now? That concludes tonight's file. If you've ever experienced something strange or unexplained, I'd love to hear your story. You can share it in the comments, or send it to the email in the description. It might become a future case on Midnight Files. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and join me for more documentary-style horror stories. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones we never forget.